And thank you everybody for joining us today. But I definitely want to thank my two fellow panelists, Ted and Patrick from AWS and Cloudhesive respectively. So thank you both for being here. We're really excited to have this conversation about how you can accelerate your CMMC compliance journey through the partnership that we have with AWS and Cloudhesive. We're going to walk you through a case study example of how working with this partnership of Prevail and Cloudhesive and AWS can hopefully accelerate your timeline for your CMMC compliance journey. Next slide, please. So I will introduce myself and then I will turn it over to my amazing panelists who will introduce themselves. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Noelle Vestal. I am the compliance officer here at Prevail. Prevail, for those of you who don't know, is an end-to-end encryption, file storage, and email solution. And we are very big in the compliance world, obviously, hence why we're having this conversation today. But we also partner with AWS and Cloudhesive. So Ted, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself. Just give us a few words.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, Ted Steffen here. I'm the head of Federal Compliance Acceleration on the Government Regions team. So I get to help drive the priority of what services we take through FedRAMP, as well as working with customers and partners to help eliminate any kind of barriers to adoption. I helped create the ATO and AWS program, was the DoD compliance architect here for a bit of time, and spent some time as a FedRAMP assessor. So looking forward to seeing how I can help in the CMMC space, and I'll turn it back to you, Noelle.
Thank you. And we love, I mean, your experience is extensive in the compliance world. So we're really appreciating your perspective on this. And last and certainly not least, we have Patrick from Cloudhesive. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, Patrick?
Great. Thank you so much, Noelle. So I'm Patrick Hanna. I am the CTO of Cloudhesive. Cloudhesive, as it happens, is an ATO on AWS partner. And for about 9 years now, we've been working with our customers to evaluate their technology and compliance needs as it relates to the public cloud, develop an approach, build that approach, and operate that approach from both a managed services and a managed security services perspective.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, again, I think this is going to be such an educational experience for a lot of our listeners to really see those different ways that these technologies and solutions and all three of our different companies can help. So thank you for that, Patrick. Appreciate it. Next slide, please, Orly. So before we actually get into the case study and start having the conversation about, how this partnership of our different solutions and companies can help you reach compliance, we want to just do a quick level set for anyone out there who may not be as familiar with the compliance sort of framework that we're talking about today, and also what the actual challenges are for compliance for a lot of the members of the DoD. So the first thing that you have to worry about, of course, is DFARS 7012, which part of DFARS 7012 is making the mandate that you have to adhere to NIST 800-171. So for those of you who are not familiar, that's 110 out of, you would have to get eventually 110 out of 110 for those. That's the 110 different controls. That is a requirement now. So that is not something that is coming in the future. That is a requirement today for pretty much every contract that's out there for the DoD. That's also applying to subcontractors. So DFARS 7020 is directly for primes, but then there's a flow down requirement of DFARS 7020 that requires all of the subcontractors to also be NIST 800-171 compliant and comply with DFARS 7012 regulation. So that obviously means there's a lot of challenges for pretty much everyone in the DIB space to get their compliance journey off and running. Institutions, especially higher ed institutions, members of the DIB, again, this is talking about where do we have CUI, where is the ingress and egress of it, and how do we protect it? I mean, that's really one of the biggest challenges that I think every company is facing, regardless of if they're higher ed or not. Where is our CUI? Where is it going? How do we keep it safe? And then where can you get help? So the CMMC ecospace is an excellent way to do that. And remember, CMMC is only a certification process of the NIST 800-171 control. So that's something really important to remember. If you are looking for additional assistance from the CMMC ecospace, you can, if you are a Prevail customer, you can always contact your salesperson or compliance@prevail.com. We can definitely give you, tons of different types of options for help and training and assistance if you need it. And then also, if you're not and you're just looking on your own, you can always go to the Cyber AB's website. They have a lot of information there. There's the marketplace and also a lot of training information. There's also external service providers, which is exactly what we're talking about today, really, because technically all of us are external service providers to our customers. But there's MSPs, which are like managed service providers, cloud service providers, which is a CSP like what we are. And the reason why we added this here at the bottom is because it's kind of like an IKEA box without instructions if you don't get help. And I think everybody has probably put together an IKEA something at some point. And if you don't follow those instructions exactly, you will probably miss a whole part, or maybe a leg will fall off. So it's very important to ask for help when you need it, and definitely ask for the right kind of help. But ultimately, and this is the most important thing here, ultimately, it is your responsibility as the organization seeking certification, or the OSC. The OSC is responsible inevitably for the compliance program. It is not any of us. It's not any other service providers that you may or may not use. It ultimately falls on you. So just wanted to make sure that we got a nice level set before we start talking about this. And I am now going to turn it over to Patrick, who's going to walk us through our case study and what we're going to be discussing today. Patrick, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Noelle. And let's go to that next slide, Orly, please. Perfect. Yeah, so we're going to talk about a top 10 university in the US. They have an enrollment of over 60,000 students and a research expenditure of $300 million for the fiscal year of 2023. It almost reads like a riddle. So what's their challenge, right? They already are getting funding for these research projects, right? So as such, they're already having to be able to at least internally demonstrate some level of compliance around NIST 800-171. Of course, what's changing now, because some of these projects are DoD funded, in order to be able to maintain this funding, they need to demonstrate CMMC compliance level 2, which includes having an assessment performed by a 3PAO, or third-party auditing organization. So, being opportunistic, they've found really there's a culmination of events at play here, right? There is this compelling event of needing to be able to demonstrate alignment to CMMC once the final requirements have been developed. They want to be able to continue to support their researchers, right? And the evolutionary aspect of technology, particularly in cloud, particularly in data-heavy research. So really combining two of these challenges, right? Demonstrating compliance, embracing cloud, and self-service capabilities, the university set out to basically long-term journey with public cloud, particularly AWS, to first lay down transitory solution to allow them to be able to demonstrate CMMC compliance for these workloads. That transitory solution is really based on a lot of the same technologies and systems those researchers are using today, contained within a virtual desktop environment, which we'll talk a bit more in some slides to follow. Transitioning from that, being able to vend really workload-specific purpose-built capabilities in public cloud, big data applications as an example, like EMR, data storage on solutions such as S3, and an ability that these researchers can really vend without going through complex requisition process, at the same time ensuring compliance. So we'll talk a bit more about this customer reference. Ted, on the next slide, and for you to follow, is going to tell us a little bit more about AWS.
And really quick, just to interject right before we do that, just to be really sure it's very clear to everybody, this is an actual customer. This is not somebody we made up. This is an actual example case study. It's not like a fictitious one. So I just want to be really sure everybody understands this is an actual real world case study. Sorry. And yes, go right back over to Ted.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so today from an AWS perspective, we're seeing many organizations face challenges in maintaining and managing the security of their on-premises environment. Why are we seeing this? And what we see is that it's a general lack of visibility and a low degree of automation. So in an on-premises environment, it can be difficult to know what resources and data are out there at any given time, where it's moving to, and who is accessing it. And so most organizations just don't have any of that level of visibility in their own on-premises environments. And without that visibility, it's challenging for organizations to secure their infrastructure and their data to meet their security and compliance requirements. Another typical challenge that we see is trying to reduce or eliminate as many manual processes that are needed today to operate the environment and to remediate issues that may arise. Manual processes tend to lead to inconsistent execution, longer deployment times, and a potential disrupting customer experience. This combination of lack of visibility and a low degree of automation reduces an organization's ability to move quickly and effectively to secure their on-premises infrastructure. With AWS, all of this is made easier, allowing you to stay agile while improving your security and meeting your compliance requirements. Next slide. With AWS, our global infrastructure spans today 27 regions and 87 different availability zones. And we have plans to add 8 more regions with 24 more availability zones. So within AWS, we have a concept of a region, which means it's a physical location somewhere in the world that we cluster data centers. And we call each of these logical data centers an availability zone. So each AWS region consists of a minimum of at least 3 isolated and physically separated availability zones within a geographic area. This allows you to architect for a very high availability solution that has the ability to operate within many regions.
And Ted, really quick, just to ask a question about that, and I'm sure there are people out there who are wondering this too. So does that also make failover? So if one of those data centers, if something happens to one of them in that region, what is I assume it makes it a much faster failover process, like you said, for availability. If you have, do you just turn over to another data center, another region, or what is that process? Very, very high level.
Yeah, so high level, that availability, we leave to our customers to architect to the level that they need. So if we're talking about something like EC2, that's not going to automatically fail from one data center to another AWS data center unless you've architected it that way. But if we talk about a service like S3, where your data is essentially spread amongst all the availability zones, that's how we can provide that 11 nines of durability with regards to data put into S3.
That's impressive. Wow, 11 nines. So 99.9, 11 times.
Yeah.
Just making sure everybody knows what that means. That is some serious availability.
So to be clear, that's durability. So if you put something in S3, it's not going to get lost.
And could you just for our listeners, what S3 is? I just want to make sure they understand what that is.
Yeah. So S3 is our simple storage service. We tend to like to shorten the names of things and make it easier to talk to them at a faster pace, I think is the whole purpose there. But
right.
So yeah, S3 is our storage service. That's object level storage.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. So when we're talking about the Defense Industrial Base and NIST 800-171 and the forthcoming CMMC, from an AWS perspective, where our customers will be able to meet the requirements, will be in our US-based regions. And we offer 2 different sets of regions. We have our commercial regions, US East-West. And those have services that are authorized up to FedRAMP moderate and DoD impact level 2. And then we have GovCloud. And GovCloud, we've got an East region and a West region for GovCloud. And it offers services that have an authorization up to FedRAMP high and DoD impact level 5. They're both accessible from the internet. That any agency or DoD entity is typically going to access those higher impact level workloads through that trusted internet connection or the cloud access point using something like Direct Connect. So that's kind of what we're trying to represent in this diagram here. And then we see that customers with highly sensitive data and regulated workloads, they really want to take advantage of GovCloud from an AWS perspective. We address the compliance of the cloud by offering network data and virtual machines that are isolated from all AWS standard regions. The GovCloud infrastructure helps customers meet a variety of compliance requirements, as I was just talking about, FedRAMP High, DoD IL 2, 4, and 5, ITAR, DFARS, CGIS, HIPAA. It's a very highly regulated cloud infrastructure that allows our customers to meet a much higher level of compliance. We do restrict access to GovCloud to our US-based customers, and the root account holder must be at least a US person. We have a different identity and access boundary, so the account that you have in commercial will not work in GovCloud. You'll have to get a different account to operate within the GovCloud regions. And we manage GovCloud solely with AWS personnel that are US citizens on US soil. And we do offer service endpoints that are specific to each region that will allow you to even support FIPS 140 encryption requirements. Next slide. So whenever we talk about the cloud and we're working with customers, we want to talk about the shared responsibility. We at AWS, we are responsible for protecting the security of the cloud. So that means we're going to ensure that all of the infrastructure that runs the services is managed and maintained and secure. When we get to the customers are responsible for security in the cloud. And this is based upon the type of services that they're using. So the lower level services, the infrastructure services, such as Amazon Elastic Compute Cloud or EC2, are categorized as infrastructure as a service. And so what this means is that the customers are responsible for performing much of the security configuration and management tasks. So if you deploy an Amazon EC2 instance, you're responsible for managing the guest operating system, including any patches and updates that are required. Any application software that you run on that, you're also responsible for maintaining any patching and configuration that's required, as well as configuring your security groups. And from an AWS perspective, security groups act as a firewall to your virtual private cloud or your VPC. Next slide. So from a CMMC perspective, what we're seeing is organizations continue their work on NIST 800-171 and are preparing for CMMC. One of the critical factors that they've got to do very early in the process is define what your scope or your certification boundary will be. And this is not a one-size-fits-all process. Each organization will have a lot of choices that will impact the cost and their overall organization IT risk. So as you're going through and defining this boundary, you'll need to understand where any controlled unclassified information or federal contract information is in your environment. And then you determine if where you find it is the appropriate place for it. And then as you go through this process, you may determine that you've got CUI or FCI flowing through or sitting on more portions of your infrastructure than you would prefer. We often see CUI residing on employees' laptops, sitting in email, sitting in a random folder on the network somewhere. And though this isn't necessarily wrong, it just becomes really hard to manage. And so without strong data handling policies, users generally have the ability to create copies of the data and store it where they determine that it's best for how they're going to use it. So as you define your CMMC boundary, you should try and minimize the scope wherever possible, and focus in on where that CUI and FCI is going to reside. Document your boundary as clearly as possible, and also maintain documentation of how you came up with that boundary. Be prepared to answer questions about how this boundary was decided, and how you will need to address and ensure that CUI and FCI is not being collected, processed, or stored in anywhere else within your environment. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Noelle.
Thank you. And I wanted to say, I really love the fact that this slide right here, I think is so applicable it's a good high level slide for anyone who's going through this journey, regardless of whether or not you decide to use an AWS Cloudhesive Prevail solution. When you were talking about scoping and figuring out that boundary, where is that CUI? Like you said, it's not bad necessarily wherever you have it. You need to make sure that you know where it is, what it's doing, how it's being protected, and be able to defend that position. Because if you just have CUI on people's laptops and it's not secure in any way, that's going to be a very indefensible position to an assessor. So yeah, love this slide. So well done. So thank you so much, Ted. This has been incredibly informative. And then the next piece of the puzzle is I'm going to send it over to Patrick to give us some information about Cloudhesive and how you can work with AWS and Prevail.
Great. Thank you so much, Noelle. So Orly, we could go ahead and pop over that next slide there, please. And so kind of recapping, some of the key takeaways for me that I've heard so far, right? Noelle, you sharing, the fact that there's this ecosystem, right? That organizations seeking compliance can go to for help, assistance, guidance, technology solutions, whatever it may be. But at the same time, it's a scenario where you're doing it that way. An organization is really building, a kind of a pre-designed piece of furniture, right? And then looking at that last slide that Ted shared with us, each organization is really going to have their own approach, right? Based on how much of the work that they're doing, falls into, the classification or categorization of FCI or CUI, potentially where the organization's future dreams and endeavors may take them. So where that kind of takes us, right, is many organizations don't necessarily possess, that depth of experience to be able to make those decisions in a risk-managed, timely, and budget-aligned manner, right? So what's particularly exciting for me, coming from kind of the consulting, professional services, and managed services space in the public cloud is this confluence we're seeing. So we were an early adopter really in the virtual desktop or VDI space, right? It's basically Amazon. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, really quick, Patrick. So I know that we both know what a VDI is. Just explain like very, very high level what a VDI experience is, because I know there are some people who are probably on the call who have never heard of a virtual desktop.
Exactly. What is that? I mean, it's virtual. Does it exist? So thank you. Great question.
No problem.
So, really, this is, somewhat mature technology, right? I want to say at least 2 decades years old, right? But effectively, when we think about, I'm on a laptop right now, we're all likely on some kind of computing device, and, that has data stored on it. It's a physical thing. Physical things, break, right? They get lost or stolen, unfortunately. So really what the virtual desktop concept aims to do is take that data stored, take that computing capabilities, really the software and data we're working with, and make it available in an environment that's centrally managed, right? And some of the advantages to that are some of those physical challenges go away. When we look at that kind of shared responsibility model that Ted shared, one of AWS's responsibilities is protection of the physical infrastructure, right? So taking this physical laptop I have and putting all of those functions somewhere that's managed by an organization with the capabilities of AWS, some of my risk is managed, right? So sort of a long answer, but
no, that's a great answer. No, that was great. That was so good. And I feel like it was very thorough, and it was still high level, but a thorough high level, if that's a thing. So yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure everybody, could
Oh,
level
please
set to
do.
understand.
Yeah. So, and it's great, right? Because, proven technology that originally was intended to solve support challenges, right? Like in the enterprise, that really pivoted to the capabilities of public cloud. So, 10, 20 years ago, when I wanted a virtual desktop solution, it was buy hardware, rack hardware, increase my overhead, both from operations perspective and really managing my information security risk. To now really using the concept of the VDI is really a container in which I'm working with my CUI, right? So when we saw the development of CMMC, especially in kind of mid 2020 period, we were able to really take the virtual desktop concept that we ourselves have been using for secure bastions internally and working with external customers and solving their enterprise needs, and pivot that to how do we solve this particular compliance need without our customers having to over-invest in how they're managing their physical assets. Right.
I love you said not over invest. I love that. I'm gonna steal that. That's great. Over invest. And it looks like you guys have been very successful with that. I was just looking at the slide, and it seems like you guys had a C3PAO customer that you were working with. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So and we engaged with that. They were a long-term customer that we worked with to help them achieve similar capabilities in other areas of compliance. And with the introduction, right, of CMMC and this organization's desire to recognition as a C3PAO, we took that solution, right, already field tested, battle tested, and pivoted into the CMMC space. What's been interesting about that is that was 2020. And, not getting too deep into the details, right? CMMC has undergone a kind of evolution or revision, right?
Just a little bit, one or two.
Version 2 now. Yeah. Makes it easier for me to understand, right? Because it's much better aligned to 800.171, which is great for a lot of organizations that are seeking compliance. And so we took this customer of ours all the way through the process of being assessed by the DFARS, which is basically the body responsible for certification, the C and C3PAO of the third-party auditor to be able to perform CMMC assessments against organizations seeking compliance in the DIB. So what's awesome is we have this full end-to-end picture, right? We designed, implemented, operated for a period of time, received, basically the assessment in recognition, or they did. And now, we're supporting them in their ongoing compliance needs, right? And great lessons learned. We understand, a lot of the importance and just the detail that goes on in demonstrating that compliance. And we do that now at scale with other customers and organizations.
Like
in
the
particular,
university we're talking about, right?
Exactly. At the same time, though, not every organization has the same needs, and those needs change. The way we operated, even last year has changed, right? So we don't necessarily want to also force, a customer into, this one size fits all approach. So that's what's particularly exciting about this. So taking the virtual desktop concept, it's an environment that's familiar to researchers. And as researchers' needs become more advanced in the tools they're using to perform their work, we're able to really carry those capabilities beyond really the VDI concept. And that's exactly what we're doing with this university as well, right? So we've met the milestone of here's something that can be used to receive, store, process, and transmit your CUI, leveraging Amazon Workspaces and Prevail. And now we can work into those other aspects of the university in order to be able to support those specific researchers' needs in the context CMMC, and other compliance frameworks that might be introduced project to project, grant to grant.
I love that you talked about scalability for this too. I think that's something that a lot of people in the audience are probably thinking about. When you mentioned what I'm doing this year is completely different than what I did last year. I'm not going to do the exact same business processes year to year, even if it feels like you are. Something has changed, something externally or internally has probably shifted in some way, right? So I think I love that you mentioned that and made that point. Things are going to change. So you need something that's going to be dynamic enough to change with you. And I know that is a concern for a lot of the people in the audience. We definitely, like, for example, with Prevail, right? Obviously we are also very easily scalable and very easily implemented. And I know that there are other alternatives out there in the CMMC space and the compliance space that maybe aren't as easy maybe to scale up or down. It might be more of an all or nothing kind of approach. Like GCC High, for example, is one of them. So yeah, I think it's really great that you made that point about scalability. And I think too that, and correct me if I'm wrong, did the university try at any point to implement some other sort of solution before they came to you and before they came to Prevail and AWS?
Yeah, let's talk about that. And it's what I call, right, really the chasm of compromise. And basically, right, the idea is we want to all be flexible, right? And we don't always expect to get our way, but you really want to evaluate the compromises you are making, right, as an individual, as an organization, as a leader, and understand which of those compromises may actually start to create gaps, right, in your ability to execute on your mission. And so in the case of the university, they have the long-term vision, right? Be able to really support researchers in their work with the native tools that those researchers prefer to use, are successful at using. And that area of research is changing as well. In particular, when we talk about data analytics, AI and ML, the latter of which has really dominated the headlines in the news for the past 6 months.
Right.
So when we look at the ecosystem, right, that you talked about, Noelle, there's, yes, absolutely alternatives. And so the university actually attempted one of those alternatives initially, right? And while that alternative allowed them to address CMMC, it started to create that kind of compromise, right? Where the particular assembly of that package did not necessarily have the kind of the full breadth of enterprise enablement and vision, right? Big data, AI, and ML services, in particular. And then to your point, right? So, well, how do I piece all these other packages together? You end up really with a larger than necessary footprint of services, each which are going to play a role in supporting your compliance needs. But at the same time, each becomes their own separate set of risks, right? So
yeah, and I think you have a slide. The next slide that you have actually is talking about shifting the burden, right?
Exactly, I love it. So let's
Perfect
go straight
segue.
to that slide. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so sort of both at the same time, a simplification, but also looks very busy. Here are basically, the majority of the controls contained in CMMC version 2, level 2, and we've color coded them, right? So with kind of the packaged solution we offer that includes our consulting and managed services, as well as Amazon Workspaces and Prevail, the customer's solely owned responsibilities drop to 0. The items, highlighted in purple there, those are the shared responsibilities. And, really a lot of those are going to fall into, user onboarding, user access, right? Background checks and things like that.
Incident response, that type of
incident
thing.
response.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. I always love the people, right? Because it's especially for smaller organizations, right? It's it's very process focused, right? How you hire or contract, especially if you contract, what's in, those agreements, background checks, access, right? There have been some kind of high profile news stories around, large enterprises with overprivileged users that were, compromised, and in turn, there was lateral movement through the network, right? So those are all very important, right? Everything though we see in this weird yellow orange color here is really what Cloudhesive, AWS through the shared responsibility model, and Prevail through their secure email and file sharing solution address for those customers. So in the end, we've got this broad ecosystem with hundreds or thousands of vendors. We've really, collapsed and consolidated it down to 3, which is amazing. Great. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Orly, please. Awesome. So the approach we took with this university, it's exactly that, right? We leveraged Amazon Workspaces, that's AWS's virtual desktop solution, for the users to basically create and use a full Windows environment. We de-risked their physical devices, right? There's some basic hygiene required, but most of that risk really gets shifted to that virtual desktop environment. The initial program that's taking advantage of these capabilities is receiving CUI from an external party, processing that within the software contained within the virtual desktop, and then sharing the result back to that third party. That file sharing mechanism is completely managed, or I should say protected and encrypted end-to-end through the Prevail solution, which is fully integrated into the virtual desktop. And Noelle's got a few slides about that. I'm not going to steal her thunder there. So, right, we eliminate that physical reliance. We also eliminate the dependencies, right? We talked a little bit about other solutions that maybe leverage a different virtual desktop solution, different cloud provider, Office 365 GCC High. A lot of that goes away. And as such, a lot of the overhead in managing audit and managing logging, managing secure configuration goes away as well. So this is the approach we took. Let's talk a little bit about the outcome here. If Orly, you mind going to the net? Perfect. So now the university has a fully managed end-to-end solution. It's reducing their challenges in demonstrating CMMC compliance. They have a path forward now, right? In which as researchers' needs change, they're able to address those changes from a technical and compliance perspective. We're eliminating, right, that burden in managing the physical devices and the infrastructure for the users. And now that initial set, I love this, right? This is one of my favorite approaches, that initial set of users and constituents, right? We turn them into evangelists, right? And they tell their story about, hey, we're able to do this in a reliable, compliant manner without hindering our work, without hindering our research. And now that gets evangelized to other colleges within the university system.
Sorry.
So the key
trying to get off mute.
Go ahead.
I was trying to get off mute.
There you go. I was like,
you're
a little quiet there.
Yeah, a little quiet. I was gonna say that's such a wonderful thing to hear, and I'm sure for the audience too, who are struggling through this, that there is a way to do this that's just a little bit less, time consuming and a little bit less crazy, and you're not going to have to use so much of that overhead like you were talking about. I think that's such a really important point to make, that this is a solution that is, I'm thinking back to that graphic that you had with all, the purple is like such a tiny amount of purple, versus how much there is that's covered by a cloud service provider. So it makes total sense, looking at this and the results, like you said, they now have a fully managed approach. They're ready to go. And now they can tell other people how great it is. Hey, this is easy. You can do this too. It's not that bad, I promise. And maybe take a little bit of the sting out of compliance. I think that's great.
For sure. Another key point around this, right? With this approach, right? Ted had the last slide he presented showed how different organizations might address how they're doing isolation, right? And even though we really started with just one project that needed to demonstrate this, each of those projects effectively has the ability to get that same experience while maintaining that data isolation and data segmentation. And again, just the thing that blows my mind, right, is with public cloud, with AWS infrastructure, that isolation, right, is completely done, really in code. We don't have to, the old school approach of creating like VLANs and stuff like that, all that goes away. And, really, in a matter of minutes, a researcher can have an environment, pre-vetted, right, that they can work in.
That's amazing when you think about it. Just, yeah, how quickly those needs can be met in this type of, it's very dynamic. The solution is just super dynamic from what you've said, from what Ted said as well. It's just so easy to scale up, down, sideways, however you need to scale, whatever you need to do. Super advantage.
It really is. So, Noelle, let's hear a little bit about Prevail.
I would love to. Thank you, Patrick. If you could go to the next slide, please, Orly. So Prevail. So we've talked about AWS and we've talked about Cloudhesive, and now it's time to talk about Prevail. So at the beginning of our conversation today, I mentioned at a very high level what Prevail is, but I will just go into a little bit more detail. So we are an end-to-end encryption, file, and email storage solution. So we have email and also then file storage. All of our data is transmitted with FIPS 140-2 algorithm encryption. We also have FedRAMP moderate equivalent status. And then, of course, we are very, very dedicated to compliance. We have a lot of different solutions from the documentation side of compliance. And also we have access to our compliance team, which includes me. So that's at a very high level what Prevail does. We are definitely a leader in the CMMC space and the DFARS 7012 space and the NIST 171 space and all the spaces when it comes to specifically, especially DoD compliance. We do support 102 out of 110 of the controls. That does not mean we do everything for you. And this is by ourselves without Cloudhesive and AWS. That means that we support 102 of those. So either shared or, fully inherited from us. And then of course, obviously there's going to be parts that are customer responsibility, as there always is. We also do adhere to the DFARS C through G. So DFARS 7012 has, for those of you who are not aware, paragraphs C through G are talking about security incident response reporting to the Department of Defense. We do adhere to that. We will absolutely work with the DoD if and when, knock wood, that never happens, but if and when that does happen, we will work with you for it or work with you on it. Compliance bundles includes our technology, an SSP template that kind of walks you through each of the 110 controls, even the ones, those 8 controls we have nothing to do with, it still walks you through those as well. We have an assessor's guide that's very detailed, bunches of security white papers. And we also, like I said before, access to the compliance team here at Prevail. We will also support you, in any way that we can during an assessment or an audit, or even just a gap analysis, whatever it happens to be. We're here to support you as much as we can. To date, Prevail supports over 800 customers. So we do have quite a few higher education institutions. We have a lot of small companies throughout the DIB. We have law offices, medical offices. We have a whole bunch of different types of organizations. And also commercial companies as well. But obviously today we're talking more about the DoD space. Next slide, please, Orly. So why did this university choose us? I feel like we went over that a little bit. Patrick, you hit the nail right on the head on a few different points on this, but I'll just, sort of piggyback on that. So challenges that the university faced, we talked about that, having this lack of dynamic flexibility. That's a huge one, I think, for a lot of companies and not just universities. I think this is across the board because as we talked about, everything changes, everything is sort of adjustable. So because Prevail is an add-on to what you already have, and it does not require to be like, for example, in a GCC high situation, it's sort of an all or nothing approach. And it makes sense why the university thought, okay, well, we don't need an all or nothing approach. We only need a couple people who need to do this, or a couple dozen, or whatever it happens to be. But again, with Prevail and also with Cloudhesive and AWS, especially combined, you have that dynamic ability to sort of section things out, just carve out that space, make that enclave just for those individuals who really need it, instead of ending up moving everybody over and and overspending and over allocating money that you don't have. So again, Prevail's ease of use. We are very straightforward. Like I said, we are a bolt-on to what you already have. And also we're very easy to use. It's a very straightforward system. If you're familiar with, moving files around on a Windows machine or on an Apple device, you've got little folders and you move them around, you give access or take it away. It's very similar to that. We try to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. It integrates with whatever system you have. So like Outlook or Gmail, you can go ahead and install the Prevail email add-on and just have that Prevail inbox in your Outlook. So you don't have to go to a different place to actually look at it, which is really nice. You can also install Prevail itself on your device. So that means that you could have access to your files on Prevail from your device if that's something that's easier for you to do. We have a lot of different ways of sort of moving around in the space. We also have the browser access, of course, and a mobile app, just in case you need a mobile app. We have a proven methodology for compliance. For those of you who are not aware, we did have a customer a couple of years ago who went through a DIBCAC high assessment and got 110 out of 110. It was a very similar situation to what we have now, where there were partners involved. We were not the only one, but that is again, proven methodology for how Prevail can make this work and make your compliance journey a little bit less terrible. Next slide, please, Orly. So why are we better together? I mean, I feel like this is probably a pretty easy one for most people to put together, but just to really sort of round it all out, we at Prevail built a huge customer and partner network. So we have a bunch of different partners. As you can see here, we've got AWS and Cloudhesive, who are two partners of ours. We have many, many others in multitudes of different spaces. And what's really great about that and developing those partnerships is that our customers can feel confident that we have vetted these different solutions, because as Patrick mentioned, and also I think Ted too, there's a lot of different choices out there when it comes to CMMC compliance. There's quite a few. And sometimes that can be very overwhelming. I've talked to many of our own customers and also some prospects as well, who have been very overwhelmed by all the options for consultants and, MSPs and CSPs. And what do I do? There's so many acronyms and I don't know what any of it means. And where do I go? So we have tried to build sort of a solution set of different types of resources and different types of organizations that can help our customers in any way that they can along their compliance journey. So that's the biggest value right there of partnership. But then what is the specific value for all three of our companies, for Prevail and Cloudhesive and AWS? AWS, we already store our Prevail data on AWS. As most of you probably know, if you're familiar with Prevail, our backend is AWS GovCloud, as Ted mentioned earlier. That is, that's up to IL5, so impact level 5 for the DoD. That's pretty secure. So our backend is extremely secure. And then you have, Cloudhesive's VDI accessible solution, as Patrick was talking about, being able to take your own individual endpoint and your own individual employees and resources endpoints out of scope and not having to think about them as much, not having to worry about it, and sort of taking that off your plate and putting that onto the plate of our company at Prevail, and also Cloudhesive and AWS makes it just so much easier when you're talking about trying to implement a solution quickly and effectively. And then obviously, there's the Prevail part of it, where we are storing and transmitting CUI and FCI in a very secure way. We also can store and transmit ITAR as well, because we are an end-to-end encrypted zero trust solution. So really, if you have any kind of sensitive data, you can most likely put it on Prevail and feel really comfortable and really secure that your data is going to remain safe. Next slide, please. So how do you get a hold of all of us? This is a great question. You see here, we have Ted Stephan at AWS. That is his contact information there. Patrick Hanna, his contact information, and then also my contact information at compliance@prevail.com. And Orly, I believe we could probably take a couple of questions if you wanted to do that.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you to Noelle, Patrick, and Ted for a great discussion of this case study. There are a couple of questions that were posed, and let's see if we can get to a couple of them. The first question is kind of, I think, a good general question. It says, is it safer to secure and certify your entire environment, or try to segment some section of it to protect CUI?
It's a good question. Ted, what do you think on this one?
Yeah, so really at the end of the day, this really comes down to a business decision. You know, if you're a 12-person organization, it may make sense to go ahead and you know, certify your entire environment. But if you're a 2,000 or 3,000 employee organization, you may not want to spend that kind of money, and you may want to be able to have your system set up in a way that as new contracts, you know, are let and you're winning them, you have a way of isolating those individual contracts from one another. So you have, you know, your core system that handles all your identity and access management, but then each new contract would come in and maybe get its own VPC instead of and AWS resources to operate out of. So you know, it really gets to be a bit of a business decision. Patrick, your opinion on that?
Fully agree. You know, kind of simplification, not exactly accurate math, 80-20 rule is how I look at it. You know, basically if you're an organization of you know, 10 folks that are, you know, doing basically the same work, you know, under the same contracts, kind of like what you said, Ted, then it's going to be across the organization, right? If you're an enterprise and maybe 25% of your work is associated with CUI, then that's absolutely where you're going to want to start to isolate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Ted. And I agree with you too, Patrick. I think you're absolutely right. It is a business decision for sure. And I think the sheer size of, you know, how many contracts do you have? How many employees do you have who need to access that information? You know, you need, but again, that goes back to what we talked about, you know, on that really great slide that you had, Ted, that I just love, where, you know, you need to figure out the scope first. Like, this question can't be answered until you know the scope of who is going to be accessing CUI, where do you have CUI, how are you going to interact with CUI? Are you going to be sending it out? Is it going to stay in? Are you going to be editing it? Is it just a reference? Is it, you know, there's so many different things you need to think about. And until you answer that question and all those subsequent questions that come after it, you can't make that business decision in an educated way. I personally don't think so. But yeah, but I think you're absolutely right, Ted and Patrick, that yeah, it really is about what is best for you, because as we've said multiple times, you know, this is not a one size fits all kind of situation with compliance. Compliance has to be sort of, you know, tweaked for every individual company, because every company is going to have their own individual things that they need to address differently.
Yeah, I've worked with a couple of higher ed organizations, and we've come up with the approach of, you know, having that isolated environment per, you know, whatever research grant they're doing. Because today, you know, maybe the you know, Florida State is doing the research on this particular thing, but next year it's going to be the University of Michigan. So it makes that data a little bit more secure and portable by being able to just transfer ownership of that to Michigan, if that's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, absolutely. Orly, are there any other last, like, we could probably take one last question in the last couple minutes if you have one.
Yeah, there's I mean, here's kind of here's an interesting one. It says, any solutions that sorry, is there any solution or a way to have a good definition of CUI that would help a company identify CUI in their documents and systems? And I know that's one we get a lot, but I think it's an answer that needs to be repeated.
I would love to hear before, because I've definitely answered this question quite a few times, but I would love to hear, Patrick, do you have any insight on that or any thoughts?
Yeah, actually, and I read it once and had one answer, read it again, I had another answer.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's about right. Yeah.
you know, yeah, exactly. I mean, my first response was obviously, and you know, in the US, NARA, you know, has defined what CUI is, right? So it's the categorization. But you know, really, I would start with evaluating, you know, what do the contracts state, and you know, with what organizations are you performing work under those contracts for, right? That was kind of the non-technical answer. The technical answer is, you know, well, it's not a good technical answer, so I'm going to skip that one. Yeah.
You know, I'll say that what I try to tell people as like a good sort of guideline, and this is a guideline, just so everybody is aware, this is because I 100% agree with you, Patrick. The first thing you need to do is look at your contract. You need to look at that contract, see if there's anything that specifically states what types of files are going to be CUI and what will not in sort of the execution of that contract. Some contracts have that, so you definitely want to check that first. If you check it and you don't see anything other than the normal stuff that everybody else sees and there's no specifics, and then you have a whole bunch of information and you're like, well, is it CUI? Is it not? The guideline that I give everyone that I talk to at a very high level is, if this information by itself or combined with another piece of information that you're responsible for could conceivably cause, a detrimental effect to United States security, you probably want to treat it as CUI. Better to err on the side of caution than not. But that's my opinion. I would rather be safe than sorry. But Ted, what do you think about? We haven't asked you what your thoughts are on this.
This is an interesting one, and we see organizations struggle with this from a couple of different dimensions. Ideally, any data that you're receiving from the DoD or whoever your contractors are, it should be appropriately marked, identifying that it in fact is CUI or FCI. There's a recent IG report out that people ought to get their hands on and read. But if you're receiving good general rule of thumb, if you're receiving information from the DoD, regardless of whether it's marked appropriately and it's related to whatever contract you might be working on, I would default and treat that as CUI, just to make it more secure and not have any questions come up later.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also too, I mean, most of the things you're going to do in the execution of a contract will probably be at the minimum considered FCI. Not all of it, but a lot of it is going to be. So yeah, and FCI isn't always necessarily marked either, but that's something to remember too. Because I know we talk about CUI so much because it is so imperative to protect it, but also FCI is involved too. So yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point too, Ted. Like just err on the side of caution. That's the best thing we can tell you to do. Definitely. Orly, do we have any other really
quick question that
Sure.
you're asking about the report that Ted just mentioned?
Yeah.
I've got the link here, Orly. I'm going to drop it in.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it's quite the article. If anybody out there who has not been able to read it, it's very eye-opening. It's very illuminating. I definitely suggest reading it.
All right. So it looks like we are just at time. Allow me to thank our wonderful guest today, Ted Stephan from AWS. Ted told me even though I'm friends with him, he still can't help me with my Prime bill, which I'm still very disappointed on.
Heartbroken. Heartbroken.
Ted from AWS. Patrick, Cloudhesive, great working with you. And as always, the incomparable Noel Vest. Well, for a wonderful webinar, and look forward to working with all of you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.